Today we are going to address a very controversial topic, giants, and how did they get here? Pastors and churches avoid this like the plague. They don't want to hear about it. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to discuss it. You know, like a 6-year-old puts his fingers in his ear. I don't want to hear about it. Well, that's what they do. So the easy answer, are there giants in the Bible, is yes. It's undeniable. It's a fact. You cannot debate it. So we could end the video now because yes, there are giants in the Bible. But we're going to continue on so you can find out how did they get here. The next videos are about Noah, his family, the flood, the animals, the ark, all kinds of cool stuff like that. And things that you hopefully have never heard about and will learn about Noah's flood. But first we have to address this giant topic, giants and how did they get here. These verses in chapter 6 that we are going to address, this is just an introduction. This just sets up the flood for us and why the flood happened. So it's basically because of Satan, his fallen angels, the giants, and their offspring, the Nephilim. Okay? And that's why God sent the flood, as we will soon see here. Before we go into these verses and I read them, we break them down a little bit, I wanted to mention two things. Number one, Noah's flood was not the first flood. The first flood was, I call Satan's flood. And that was Satan, the original sin, the original evil, how he rebelled against God, and how God punished him in that world is by a flood. Okay? And the second thing that I wanted to mention is that there is a spiritual world out there. There's a spiritual realm. There's spiritual dimensions out there. Okay, we as humans and in the flesh, we don't really think like that because we think here in the now. We think things that we can touch, things we can taste, things we can hear, things we can see. Okay, all evil comes from Satan. Satan is the root of all evil. Satan is powerful. And the Bible tells us that we fight against those powers and those principalities in those spiritual world. The Bible tells us to flee from Satan. I know years ago, and maybe still today, in the charismatic and the Pentecostal churches, they used to preach and get fired up a lot. Like, we're going to face Satan, we're going to defeat Satan, we're going to punch Satan in the nose. Well, the Bible tells us to actually flee from Satan because Satan is powerful. He's an angel, but I just use it as a saying. He was God's right-hand man. So if we battle with Satan, I guarantee you we're going to lose against Satan. And that's why the Bible tells us to flee. Satan's greatest tool is the tool of deception. Deceit, deception. He wants to get his hooks and his lies into us. And his lies that he created, he wants us to believe. And those lies are still going on today, and people are still believing those lies. It's interesting in Jesus talked in Matthew 24. It's called the Olivet Discourse. And that's just talking about end times, and he's talking with his disciples. And his disciples are asking him questions about the end times. Jesus starts that discourse with deception, and he ends it with deception. Okay, and he says, stay away from deception. You're going to be deceived. There's false teachers out there. There's false teachings out there. Keep away from all of that stuff. And they say like, well, how's the end times? What's it going to be like? When's it going to come about? And Jesus said, it's going to be like in the days of Noah. So that's pretty interesting if you ever get a chance to read Matthew chapter 24 and 25. So let's break these down a little bit. In chapter 6 in Genesis, verse 1. And it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them. So the first thing that jumps out should be men. It's humans, okay? It's saying that they began to marry and they began to have children. Well, it was happening before this, but here it tells us it really began to multiply. They really started to marry a lot, and a lot of children started being born at this time. Okay? Verse 2, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. So this verse is kind of comparing and contrasting the first verse where it talks about humans. It talks about now the sons of God. which is Ben Elohim. And all that means is angels. Every single time the sons of God is addressed or worded in the Old Testament, it is talking about angels and never a human. People get confused on that because in the New Testament, there are sons of God, and those are believers of God. Never in the Old Testament are believers called sons of God. Also, in that verse, okay, it says that they took wives for themselves. So it's telling us that these sons of God, these angels, came down and they kind of forced themselves, and they saw that these women were beautiful and they took them for their wives. Now, throughout the Bible, it also tells us that angels in the Bible, they can materialize into physical body. So that does happen, and we know that can happen because the Bible tells us that. Verse 3, it says, "And the Lord said, My spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh, and yet his days shall be 120 years. That verse is taken out of context a lot of times, and you may have heard that verse or it's preached. It doesn't mean lifespan. It doesn't mean your lifespan is 120 years. If you do some research today, man is only 76 or 77 and woman is 80, 81. So that's not 120 years. And before the flood, it wasn't 120 years. And after the flood, it wasn't 120 years. So it's not talking about that. Remember, this is an introduction that's leading us to Noah and the flood and why it happened. God is explaining it to us. So he is giving Noah 120 years to preach to this generation because the Bible calls him a preacher of righteousness. So he preached to this generation, change them from their evil ways, get them to come back to me. Well, nobody came. I like to use this verse also if you ever get down about yourself. Nobody's listening to me. I read my Bible. I witness to people. I ask people to church. I talk about Jesus, and yet nobody's converted. Well, you can just go back to this verse in the story of Noah. Noah preached 120 years and not one soul came. So that's very interesting. So you know God is kind. He's graceful. He's merciful. He's long-suffering. He gave him 120 years. So that's what that verse means. Verse 4, there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, before the flood and after the flood, when the sons of God, Elohim, the angels, came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. So that verse is kind of elaborating a little bit on verse 2. Angels came down, fallen angels, and they had sexual relations with the daughters of men, okay? And their offsprings were the giants, and their offsprings were called the Nephilim. So that actually did happen, okay? Because we know that because the sons of God is always referenced as an angel in the Old Testament. At the end of that verse, it said, the same became mighty men, and which were of old, men of renown. That is the start in the beginning of all of your Greek mythology. I don't know, and I don't know much about Titan and Zeus and the half goat and half man. All of that stuff is right here, and it comes from this verse, and that is the beginning of that. It's interesting, isn't it? Verse 5 says, and God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continuously. So all of the thoughts of man, everything that in his heart was evil. The angels came down and they taught this generation knowledge in heavenly things. They taught them evil things. They taught them war. They taught them weapons. They taught them all kinds of things like that. Remember what I said, the angels are powerful. They're intelligent. They're smart. Those are the principalities and the powers that I talked about just a second ago. These angels have ranks, okay? And there's leaders, and there's councils of God and courts of God. And it talks about that in the book of Job. It's just like a huge business. you have the CEO, and then he passes it on to him, and then he's in charge of these people, and then they give it to him, and they pass it on to him. That's exactly how the rank and the order of God's angels work. So God obviously had courts with them and councils with them, and he told them a lot of things. Okay, and they came down here and they intermingled and they passed a lot of this information on to humans, and that was a no-no, and that did not sit well with God. Verse 6 says, "And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. And the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I created from the face of the earth, both man, the beast, the creeping thing, and the fowls of the air, and it repenteth me that I have made them." God repented. He grieved, and it says his heart, and that's all that means. That God's heart was sad, that all of this stuff was going on, and he said, I'm going to have to destroy this generation, and I'm going to do it by sending a flood. Verse 8 says, "But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord." And that is the beginning of the flood, okay? The first 7 verses of this chapter just tell us that God sent the flood because of angels, the giants, and their offspring. What God is saying is, we have a genetics problem, we have a DNA problem, we have a gene pool problem. The angels came down and they intermingled with humans. That's going on today. We have a genetics problem. We're messing with plants. We're messing with the fruits and vegetables. We're messing with animals. And we're messing with human beings. And that is messing with God's own kind. Early before this, in the beginning of the Bible, remember, if you read the story of creation, God says everything is after its own kind. All the plants, all the animals, all the fruits and vegetables, all the humans, everything is after its own kind. When we mess with God's genetics, with his DNA, that ticks him off. And he's going to have a problem with it, and he's going to do something about it. And that's what's going on today. So, what is Satan's objective throughout this whole book, throughout the whole Bible? It's to stop the seed and the line of the Messiah. Early in Genesis, even before this, what did God say? The woman's seed is going to destroy Satan's seed. Okay? Satan knew he was going to be destroyed. So what's his plan throughout the entire Bible? He has to stop the seed of the Messiah, of Jesus Christ. Okay? And that is why he is mixing and intermingling these DNAs. He's trying to stop the seed of Jesus Christ. Well, we know from reading the book he failed. And now all we're waiting for is the end times to happen. Another thing that I want to do before we start to close here is I want to give you an alternate view of this verse, okay? And what most people believe, and if churches dare even preach on this, is what they teach. Remember, in verse 2 I read that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, and that they were fair, and that they took them wives for all that they chose. So they say the sons of God is the holy line of Seth. Remember, Adam and Eve had Cain and Abel. Cain killed Abel. So Cain's line became the ungodly line, the bad line. Then the Bible says that Adam and Eve had Seth, and that was the holy line. So Seth's holy line intermingled with Cain's unholy line, and that produced the giants. Well, I know throughout all of the generations on earth, there has been times when believers and non-believers have intermingled and had offspring, and there's no giants running around. So that's just kind of nonsense. And the other thing to debunk that is, if Seth's line was the holy line, why did God destroy that holy line in the flood? Only Noah was righteous and pure in the eyes of God, not the line of Seth. And there's many other reasons why you can debunk that, but that's just a couple, and you can see that that's obviously not what is going on here in this precursor verses to the flood. The other thing that I wanted to mention before we close, I talked about a lot of things here, and you may say, Yeah, maybe, maybe not. I believe it. I don't believe it. There's 3 books out there: the book of Enoch, the book of Jasher, and the book of Jubilees. All these books, you probably don't know, are mentioned in your Bible. And it's interesting, the book of Enoch is even quoted in the book of Jude. The book of Jude is in the New Testament towards the end. And these books were found also in 1947 in the caves of Qumran, the Dead Sea Scrolls. You have probably heard of them. It has every book of the Old Testament and other books, and these books are in there. These books talk a lot about creation, angels, giants, the Nephilim. They call them the Watchers, creation, ages past. So they help us put together a lot of these pieces of the puzzle in the book of Genesis. These books are just called the apocryphal books. And that just means that they weren't canonized. They weren't put in our book of our 66 books. And I don't want to get into that right now. Another interesting thing is the 1611 King James Bible came with the Apocrypha in it. And if you're Catholic and have a Catholic Bible, almost all of your Catholic Bibles have these apocryphal books in them. They still read them in their churches and they still believe them to be true. The other thing is our early churches and our early church fathers read these books and quoted from these books. And churches around the world still read from these books, and a lot of them still have them in their Bible. A lot of times, because of the bubble we live in here in Western Michigan, we believe we have the market cornered on Christianity, and we don't. There are Christians all over the world that are doing different things than we do. So I hope this puts this together for you, helps you piece it together. I hope it sets up the flood account for you. Some things that we are going to continue to talk about and address in these Noah floods that are upcoming is, remember in the verses that I read, it said before and after. There was giants before and there were giants after. It goes all the way up to the book of Samuel and King David. That's undeniable. That's just a fact. So what do giants have to do? What does King David have to do? What does Bashan and Mount Hermon in the land of Canaan and Ham, Noah's son, and Ham's son, Canaan, and Nimrod all have to do with this continuation of the angels and the giants in Noah's flood? And we will continue to answer these and address this in our upcoming videos about Noah.